Every financial scam in history shares one structural flaw: returns that depend entirely on new money entering the system rather than any real value being generated. From tulip bulbs worth more than houses, to crypto exchanges evaporating overnight, to a guy named Charles who thought postal coupons were a personality trait. Today I'm breaking down every major financial scam that actually worked and why we keep falling for the same trick. Starting 400 years ago with flowers. The Dutch tulip mania. In the 1630s, the Netherlands lost its collective mind over a flower. Single tulip bulbs were selling for the price of a house in Amsterdam. Not a nice house, a house. Here's where it gets interesting. In 1636, the market became a futures market. People were trading contracts, pieces of paper, saying, "I own a flower that's still in the ground." Nobody was buying tulips anymore. They were buying the idea of tulips. Then in February 1637, the whole thing collapsed overnight. Auctions went from bustling to empty within days. Everyone suddenly realized they were holding paper that entitled them to a flower worth less than the paper itself. The structural problem was simple. Every single guilder of profit depended on finding someone willing to pay more than you did. The moment new money stopped flowing in, the entire system vaporized, which is, not ideal. And here's the part that should concern you. This happened 400 years ago and humans learned absolutely nothing from it. Because the next scam on this list used the exact same mechanic, just with a more charming frontman. The Ponzi scheme. Charles Ponzi was so good at lying, he basically named a whole category of scams after himself. He promised something so absurd like 50% profit in 45 days or 100% in 90 days that it should have set off every alarm. Yet he convinced thousands he had discovered a magical arbitrage in international postal reply coupons, where he claimed he could buy them cheaply abroad and redeem them at full face value in the US. The catch? He never once made a single postal coupon trade. By July 1920, Ponzi's operation was pulling in $250,000 a day, and over its year-long run, it cost investors a staggering $20 million, equivalent to about $237 million today. The profits he paid were just the money of new investors redistributed to earlier ones, an endless cycle of robbing Peter to pay Paul. The whole thing collapsed in August 1920, leaving financial ruin behind. What's wild is Ponzi didn't invent this scam. Cons like his existed before. But his audacity, timing, and ability to spin a convincing story made his name synonymous with this type of fraud. The core trick? Creating the illusion of legitimate returns that can only keep going if you keep recruiting new money. It's one giant house of cards that crashes when the flow stops. If you think a guy selling postal coupons is silly, buckle up. Next, we're diving into the legendary world of the Nigerian prince and advance fee fraud. The Nigerian prince. Everyone knows this is a scam. Your grandmother knows this is a scam. The phrase Nigerian prince email is literally a punchline, and yet romance and advance fee scams still pull in hundreds of millions of dollars every single year in the US alone, which is, not ideal for something everyone supposedly sees coming from a mile away. Here's the thing, this scam dates back to the 1800s as the Spanish prisoner swindle, where con artists convinced marks to pay fees to free a wealthy prisoner who'd reward them handsomely. The internet just gave it a global megaphone, and by the 1990s it had its modern form and its legal name, Section 419 of the Nigerian Criminal Code. The formula is almost insultingly simple. Someone contacts you claiming to have millions in unclaimed funds. They'll give you a cut. All you need to do is cover a few thousand in processing fees, then another fee, then another. But here's where it gets unsettling. The email being badly written is the filter. It weeds out skeptics so scammers only spend time on vulnerable targets. Once they're in, they use urgency, sympathy, and greed. Three emotions that bypass logic entirely. The shared DNA with every other scam on this list. Promising outsized returns for small upfront investment when zero underlying value exists. Same skeleton, different costume. But if you think a badly formatted email is dangerous, wait until you see what happens when Wall Street wraps the same idea in a stock ticker. The dot-com pump and dump. The dot-com bubble is the scam where the victims thought they were absolute geniuses. Between 1995 and March 10, 2000, the Nasdaq Composite Index surged by an insane 600%, only to crash a brutal 78% by October 2002, wiping out trillions in market value. More than 1,000 internet companies went public during this frenzy. Many had zero actual revenue models beyond slapping .com on their names. Take Pets.com, the poster child for this madness. They raised $82.5 million in their IPO, ran a flashy Super Bowl ad starring a sock puppet mascot, and then collapsed just 268 days later. That little sock puppet became the face of all the ridiculous excess of the era. Investors weren't dumb. They genuinely believed the internet was revolutionary and that traditional metrics like profit didn't matter anymore. Here's the kicker. Intelligent people fell hard because the underlying technology was actually game-changing, which made it nearly impossible to separate real innovation from pure speculation. everyone convinced themselves that revenue was obsolete and that these companies just needed to exist to be valuable. But here's where it gets weird. The shared structural feature with every other scam on this list, asset prices were propelled entirely by new speculative money, none of it backed by earnings or real economic output. It was a classic robbing Peter to pay Paul, but with charts that looked like a rocket launch. If you think a sock puppet crashing a company is absurd, wait until you hear about the accounting tricks that took down Enron. Next, Enron is accounting fraud. Enron didn't just cook the books, they built an entire parallel financial universe on paper, got one of the 5 largest accounting firms on earth to sign off on it, and then watched 20,000 employees lose everything when it evaporated overnight. Here's how it worked. At its peak, Enron reported revenue exceeding $100 billion and held assets over $60 billion. Those numbers were real enough to make it the 7th largest company in America. But behind the curtain, executives were creating off-balance sheet entities with the names like LGM, Cayman, and Raptor, specifically designed to hide approximately $27 billion in debt the company was bleeding out. The spreadsheets just said otherwise. And Arthur Andersen, their auditor, one of the big 5 accounting firms, signed off on all of it, every quarter, for years. When the SEC came knocking, Andersen employees shredded documents so aggressively that the entire firm was dissolved, gone. One of the oldest accounting firms in the world wiped off the map because they helped Enron pretend debt wasn't real. The market cap went from $68 billion in August 2000 to less than $1 billion by November 2001. That's a 98.5% destruction of value in 14 months. Employees who had their retirement savings in Enron stock watched their futures disappear in real time, while executives cashed out millions in the months before collapse. The whole thing directly produced the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. Congress literally had to write new laws because of how badly this broke everything. But if Enron built a fake financial universe for one company, wait until you hear about the time Wall Street did it to the entire housing market. The 2008 mortgage securitization scam. Every other entry on this list involves someone breaking the law. This one is scarier because for the most part, it was technically legal. Here's how it worked. Banks took subprime mortgages, loans given to people who probably couldn't pay them back, and bundled thousands together into mortgage-backed securities. Then they repackaged those into collateralized debt obligations, layers on top of layers. And every layer made it harder to see what was actually underneath. But here's where it gets truly insane. The agencies responsible for rating these products were being paid directly by the banks creating them. That's like asking a restaurant to grade its own health inspection. They slapped Albert Way ratings, the highest possible, onto securities backed by fundamentally worthless mortgages. Saying no meant losing the client. At the peak, outstanding mortgage-backed securities exceeded $10 trillion. Subprime mortgages alone accounted for $1.3 trillion. Deutsche Bank paid $7.2 billion to settle claims it misled investors about quality, which is, not ideal. The complexity was the weapon. You couldn't trace individual mortgage quality back through the chain. Nobody could. That was the point. And just like every other scam on this list, the whole thing only worked as long as new money kept flowing in, while the underlying assets quietly rotted. Millions of ordinary people lost their homes, and the people who built the bomb got bailouts. But if you think a legal scam affecting millions is bad, wait until you hear about one man who stole $65 billion using nothing but a calculator and a reputation. Bernie Madoff's investment fraud. Remember how Charles Ponzi's scheme lasted about a year before the whole thing caved in on itself? Bernie Madoff ran the exact same trick for decades, at 3,000 times the scale, which is, not ideal. Here's how it worked. Madoff promised investors steady returns of 10 to 12% annually. Didn't matter if the market was up, didn't matter if it was crashing. Your returns stayed consistent. He claimed to use something called a split strike conversion strategy, which sounds complicated enough that most people just nodded and handed over their money. But here's where it gets dark. Investigators discovered that Madoff hadn't executed a single trade in years, not one. His entire operation was just moving money between accounts. Office workers fabricated trading reports based on whatever returns Madoff told them to generate. The whole thing was a spreadsheet and a prayer. The numbers are staggering. Approximately $36 billion was invested into the scheme. Around $18 billion remains missing. Gone. Evaporated into payments to earlier investors who thought they were collecting profits. But the real product Madoff was selling wasn't returns, it was status. Former NASDAQ chairman, prominent philanthropist, connected to every major financial institution in New York, people didn't invest because the math checked out. They invested because being accepted into his fund felt like joining an exclusive club. He turned people away to make it feel more exclusive. The velvet rope was the scam. He pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies and received 150 years, the longest sentence possible for a man who proved that social proof can override any amount of financial literacy. But if you think a fake investment fund is brazen, wait until you hear about a publicly traded company that invented 1.9 billion euros out of thin air. Wirecard. Here's the thing about most financial scams on this list. They involve some level of sophistication, complex derivatives, shell companies, strategies that sound impressive in a boardroom. Wirecard just made up money, literally invented it. 1.9 billion dollars in trust accounts that did not exist. Not hidden, not misallocated, just fictional. Written on a spreadsheet somewhere in Munich by people who apparently thought nobody would ever check, and nobody did, for years. Wirecard was a German fintech darling that made it into the DAX 30, Germany's most prestigious stock index. At its peak, the company was worth more than Deutsche Bank. A company where roughly 1/3 of its reported revenue was completely fabricated was valued higher than one of the oldest banks in Europe. Ernst & Young certified Wirecard's financial statements year after year. The Financial Times published investigations. Short sellers screamed that the numbers didn't add up. And EY's response was essentially, looks good to us. They were later accused of failing to verify basic financial controls, which is, the one thing auditors are supposed to do. When the House of Cards collapsed in June 2020, investors lost approximately $23.8 billion. That's 99.84% of the company's 2018 market value, gone. Overnight. But the best part? COO John Marsalek, the guy widely believed to be the architect of the fraud, simply got on a plane and vanished. Currently wanted by Interpol, just packed a bag and left like a man who'd been planning his exit since day one, which he probably was. Germany called it their Enron moment, but Enron at least had the decency to hide its fraud inside complex structures. Wirecard just wrote down a number that wasn't real and dared anyone to question it. If you think institutional failure enabled Wirecard, wait until you see what happens when you build an entire exchange on vibes and stolen customer deposits, FTX, and Sam Bankman-Fried. In 2021, FTX was worth $32 billion. Sam Bankman-Fried was on the cover of Forbes, testified before Congress in shorts and a t-shirt, donated tens of millions to politicians, and positioned himself as the responsible adult in crypto, the guy who was going to make it all legitimate. Here's the thing. He was running the exact same scam as a flower market in 1637. Customer deposits went into FTX. Those deposits got funneled to Alameda Research, his sister trading firm, to cover losses and fund luxury real estate in the Bahamas. The exchange's balance sheet wasn't backed by real assets. It was backed by FTT, a token that FTX itself created, which is like printing your own money, lending it to yourself, and then telling everyone you're a billionaire. On November 2nd, 2022, CoinDesk revealed Alameda's balance sheet was mostly made up of this token. Within 9 days, the whole thing was gone. $32 billion in valuation, evaporated. $8 billion in customer funds, missing. Bankman-Fried got 25 years and was ordered to forfeit $11 billion, cold comfort for people who lost their life savings on a glorified shell game. But here's what nobody wants to sit with. Every single scam on this list, from tulip bulbs to crypto tokens, from Ponzi's postal coupons to Madoff's fake trades, exploits the same structural trick. Customer money gets treated as house money. Reputation substitutes for transparency, new inflows paper over old losses, and the whole thing collapses the instant confidence wavers. 400 years of financial innovation, and the con hasn't changed once. The only thing that evolves is the wrapper. The real question isn't why these scams keep working. It's why every single person who falls for them believed they were too smart to be the mark. That's the actual vulnerability. Not greed, not ignorance, certainty. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.